Great. Thanks so much, Hannah. And thanks so much to the network for inviting me for this talk. I think as like many of us, I'm always feeling these days that the pandemic at least has had one good effect in terms of kind of making the world a little bit smaller when it comes to these kind of talks. So I'm really glad to be able to kind of share my results with you there in Britain in a way that perhaps before the pandemic wouldn't have been possible. And and so I appreciate that, and I appreciate equally the audience that's turned out. Seem to have come from many different places. Again, another good byproduct of an otherwise kind of terrible situation with the pandemic. Right, so thank you all to the hosts and to the guests. I'll jump right in to the report itself, by first telling you a bit about myself as a researcher. Hannah mentioned some of the work I've done in recent years, and what I wanted to emphasize about that work, is, and here you have all my affiliations and such. The logo is very important here in Spain. Right, we must always include them. Right, but the trajectory of my research is something I wanted to kind of dwell on a bit in recent years. Hannah mentioned my book on Scottish cinema, which was very policy oriented. Right, and I think this is an interesting trajectory for European media research to go, or media industries research to go down, in the sense that I moved from that research to, I felt in a very organic way, towards looking at what we'd call in economic terms, small and medium enterprises, what we call in film studies terms, producers, producers as creative agents, and these do happen to be very small companies, and I think it was very important to have that perspective for what I'm doing now. And in my subsequent project, growing out of the producer research, I became very interested in producer-distributor relationships. Actually looking at those dynamics and the creative issues and industrial issues that arise from those, and that's sort of what led me to Studiocanal, and European cinema through the lens of private enterprise, as opposed to the public institutions I started out with, and a long story short is that that work became the heart of a Marie Curie project I was doing here in Spain for about 4 years. Produced a book and several articles, and also I was very keen to kind of share that research with European industry people, as much as possible. They don't tend to enjoy film studies for whatever reason. Research, they tend to shy away from it. But I kind of somewhat aggressively pushed this book on to people at the European Commission and within the media program in Creative Europe. And lo and behold, they gave me a call at one point to ask me to kind of extrapolate some of my results and to discuss the kinds of companies I was interested in that book. Studiocanal itself, a division of one of the conglomerates I'll be discussing today, Vivendi, part of the Canal Plus group, which is embedded within Vivendi. And my newest research project was and is to be about Netflix films, Netflix original films, and the kind of impact they have on the global film industry. And for that reason, the Commission asked me to kind of blend these two research projects to talk about both the European cinema specifically and television, the European screen industries, but also this new moment we're in, which was intended just to be about the arrival of global streaming services, but became also a bit about COVID, and then also to kind of look, to use my knowledge of the European conglomerates like Vivendi, Studiocanal, and to place them into that context. And so that produced this report, which you have the little icon here on the slide. And you'll see that it's quite a long bureaucratic sounding report title, which is how the European Commission likes it, of course, no art in the title, just the details of the content, and the kind of working model I developed for understanding the relationships that I think we've got to understand in order to appreciate what's going on in the industry now is there, these kind of interlocking wheels, right? And I wanted to emphasize in the report the kind of vital role that the European conglomerates can and could and should play, right, in this new landscape, right? And I'll explain the reasons for that as we go through the presentation, right? And so, right, to cover some ground, I think many of us will be familiar with, right, but to kind of give some more details about it, right? For the European screen industries, like all the global screen industries in the last 5 years or so, have been transformed in kind of fundamental ways, right? By the massive international rollout of firstly two subscription video on demand services, right? SVODs, as I'll refer to them throughout the talk. And I'm every once in a while reminded of how particularly ugly word that is, SVOD, right? But sorry, it's what I'll use as the kind of shorthand. Right, the first of these, of course, was Netflix, right? The really pioneering global SVOD that came to Europe in kind of two waves. One of those, primarily the Anglophone parts of Europe, and then secondly, in 2015, the rest of Western Europe, right? And by about 2018, right, to all of Eastern Europe as well, right? And then Amazon Prime had a similar kind of two-wave structure, though its first wave was initially the UK and Germany, right? Which is a kind of a reminder that that SVOD service is linked to its shipping service, which is the much more important business for Amazon, right? Right, and then we've had a wave from Apple TV, which is still was kind of halted in its tracks a bit by COVID. All right, for various reasons, but is a kind of unique company in its own right. But yet I feel like these three companies are very much related by business models, right? And I won't really dwell on that in this talk. But we can also see a kind of second wave happening more or less simultaneously with the beginning of the pandemic and the arrival of Disney Plus in many European markets. That coincided roughly with the rollout of Stars Play, which is a division of US studio Lionsgate, right? And numerous others. And HBO Max was kind of a weird case of HBO itself becoming an SVOD instead of a pay television network. Right, and this is still ongoing. Here in Europe, we'll be getting Sky Showtime soon, which is going to be a joint venture to Hollywood studios. Right, and again, the distinction here is not so important for us, but it is an important distinction in my research. And what's more interesting is that it kind of came in two waves, right? These tech companies, and then secondly, the legacy studios. Right, the divisions of Hollywood studios. And I should clarify really at the beginning what I'm talking about when I talk about Europe here, right, which is to say that this report was commissioned by the European Commission, who specifically asked me to only look at the EU, right, the European Union, right, and in this case, the EU 27, meaning excluding Britain, right, so this is a sort of post-Brexit version of Europe. And it's not to say that I consider Britain any less European, but for the sake of the scope of this study, right, I was asked to specifically to exclude Britain. So, right, kind of awkward giving a talk in Britain and having that definition of Europe, but at the same time, it will explain a few of the gaps you'll see in the content I'm talking about. But for what it's worth, aside from the regulatory framework, I think many of the issues I'm discussing are going to be true also of the United Kingdom, right? To a lesser extent, some of the non-EU European countries as well, right? But every country is a little different in that sense when it comes to regulation and so on. All right, now simultaneous to the rollout of these services, it's been a kind of transformation in audience behavior. Right, put crudely, Right, SVOD has within the last 3 years or so become the new television, right, for many consumers, meaning that an extremely widely watched, used, subscribed to service. Right now, a fundamental part of many of our media lives. Even if linear television is far from dead, even if going to the cinema is far from dead. Right, COVID has helped to kind of create the conditions in which SVOD has become, one of our dominant ways of seeing media, screen media. Right, and again, this is not news, but the extent to which that is the case, right, is extremely important for kind of thinking about the future of screen industries in Europe and elsewhere, of course. Right, so a radical change to consumer patterns as well as kind of industrial influx. Right, now, one of the kind of fundamental parts of my study, is what I describe in the report and what many industry observers have described as a kind of boom in production investment. Right, the presence now suddenly of competitors for linear television networks and pay television means that there is more demand in the system, right? And the platforms themselves have had marketing strategies that involve a great deal of investment in what they call original content or exclusive content, right? And have also had to kind of fill their platform with licensed material as well, right? All the platforms, to some extent or another, with the exception of Apple TV Plus, which is a kind of interesting service in some ways, right, have great deals of licensed content, right, that they of course have to pay for, that they need, right, and this, just from the very beginning, is meant to kind of good news for the continent's content producers, right. There are much higher demand, much higher costs, much higher investment in production than there was only 5 or 6 years ago. So here in Spain, for example, right, Netflix alone makes the same number of drama series that the entire broadcast community in Spain were making in 2006, right? So I've more or less single-handedly doubled, right, I'm sorry, in 2011, right? So single-handedly doubled the demand for TV drama series, right, serial fictions, right, to one single company, right? And on top of that, to fill the licensed part of the catalog, right, many distributors are seeing their back catalogs become suddenly much more valuable. Right, now, helping to drive that has been a major policy intervention that I think many of us will be familiar with, right, which has been the European Commission's, right, Audiovisual Media Services Directive, right, which is essentially, just to put it crudely, a content quota, right, that requires the platforms to maintain at least 30% of their catalogs, right, as being made up of European produced content. Right, in the long term, this will be a big challenge for Britain. Right now, Britain's in sort of kind of neutral position where they haven't lost European status as a consumer, as a label on their products, but that will change eventually. Right, but this, right, getting ready for compliance with this directive has meant that the platforms have had an extra incentive to begin investing in original production and, again, licensing, right? So a major catalyst, right? And so even though I'll be talking about the private sector here, right, we can't look past how important this kind of policy intervention has been, right? And each of the member states has been kind of crafting their own versions of the law that puts this into force, right? And attaching conditions related to local content, national content, right, as well, right? And also in many cases, revenue investment. Right, again, kind of familiar ground, I would think, for anybody who likes to watch a lot of TV series these days, right, is that we now have a kind of boom time in, right, drama series being made for the platforms themselves, right, and there are many European examples one could select for this, right? I've here chosen 3 of the most popular, right? The 3 Netflix series here, a Spanish series, a German series, and a French one, right? And I've also included Amazon is sort of lagging in their European drama series production relative to Netflix, right? But they've been making original series on the continent, since at least 2017. When they made their first German series. And again, this is where Amazon, they're a key part of their strategy has been in the German-speaking market, right? And so that's You Are Wanted there, right? But the other 3 series I think will be very familiar to most of you watching this presentation, right? And again, we could have selected many others for that, right? Right, so this is the great opportunity, right? That is greeted European producers, right? And I use the term here, producers, very broadly, European creatives, we could say, right? There is more demand than anyone can ever remember, right? You can have many, many meetings, right? You can auction off your properties to multiple different buyers because as documented more extensively in the report, not only are the platforms themselves looking for great deals of content, basically in the case of the big tech platforms, right, starting from zero, right, having nothing, right, in terms of original production or owned properties, right, and so having to start from scratch, right? But then you have the legacy studios who need to meet the quotas, right? And then on top of that, you have the existing media companies, the linear television networks, the paid television networks, and so on, who've turned to drama as a kind of way to compete with the platforms themselves. Right, so it's an incredible surge in production that's been taking place. Right, this is great for anyone working in the industry, and we've actually seen a number of important European creatives either break through because of the support of platforms, the patronage of Netflix or Amazon, right? And this is in a sense the kind of diversification that the platforms have brought. Every European national market, right, has its own kind of media oligopoly, right? That has made access to the media systems difficult for somebody. Right, and you're seeing new artists come through because there's simply more chances. Right, seen more negatively, you could also interpret that to be that the platforms are coming and buying up these European talents and putting them in what you'd call in trade speak golden handcuffs, right? Taking them away from the national media system, paying them much more money, right? Putting a great deal of pressure on the existing media companies, right? And then keeping their work, right? Which is kind of typified in the case of Spain, for example, with the creators of Money Heist, right? These were very successful television writers who now write exclusively for Netflix, right? But on the other hand, you could see the example of the writers of Dark, right? Who were not so successful in the local industry before, right? Netflix kind of came along, and now they also work exclusively for Netflix, right? And this is either a problem or a great opportunity, depending on how you see it. Right, now on top of that, the other really good news for Europe is not just that we're seeing a great deal of production and very wealthy or very lucrative contracts being handed out to European creatives, but we're actually seeing European content circulate more widely than people can seem to remember. Right, and to be fair, right, it's hard to measure before, right, before the digitization of consumption in the way that we've seen in the SVOD era, right. But Netflix can quote stats in a way that other companies couldn't in the past, right. A linear television network can't measure as efficiently as Netflix can. Right, but that being said, right, it is definitely the case that we're seeing these works, right, circulate globally in ways that they never did before. Right, so some of the slides some of the works I've discussed already, like Money Heist or Lupin, right, are global hits on a scale that are hard to fathom. And Netflix puts out statistics to kind of substantiate that, right? But you didn't really need the statistics if you're just a Brazilian soccer fan or Saudi Arabian soccer fan, and you saw fans holding up banners that are calling on the players to act more like the professor from Money Heist, or the manager to act more like the professor from Money Heist, right? You're seeing people in Argentina tattooing the faces of characters onto their bodies and so on, right? These things are going on, right? And again, speak to the global reach of these series, right? That I've already discussed, but also, right, you're seeing films circulate in this way as well, right? And I've just a couple of examples of films. Primarily, I've thrown in one series here, Barbarians, that I didn't mention already, but was cited by Netflix as a kind of big global hit on the platform. But the other four examples here are original films from Netflix that have reached numbers that would be unimaginable using traditional film distribution, right? So the one example I'll give here, this one, the platform, right, was said by Netflix anyway to have been seen by over 50 million accounts, right? And if you just imagine, even if you combined all the television ratings of a Spanish language horror film, right, all over the world, it's hard to imagine that 56 million people would have watched it, right? And that's just accounts. So there's more than one person with those accounts and so on, right? So it's a very big number. Right. And, what artist doesn't want a big global stage? And this is something the platforms can promise, right, in a very kind of rapid way, right? That this work will be instantaneously available all over the world and likely to be seen, like something like Below Zero by over 40 million accounts, or Blood Red Sky by over 50 million, and so on and so forth, right? So really kind of unthinkable numbers for non-English language content, especially, right? And all these are made either in Spanish, French, or in German, right? So in Barbarians would be the one TV series in this slide, right? That was, again, right, praised for its global circulation. Particularly, Barbarians was a hit in the United States, supposedly, according to Netflix's data, right? And the idea of a German language show, right, being widely seen in the Anglophone world is itself a kind of mind-boggling thing, right? But being a media industries person, right, we must always be critical, right? And also, I was really keen in the report to try to point out some of the problems with this boom and what it means for Europe, right? Right, and these problems I'll discuss right now look past the obvious problem of all these platforms being American-based, right? We're kind of having a reconstitution of the Hollywood oligopoly that dominates the film industry and dominates television, right? So we're getting essentially the money going in the same direction, which itself is a basic problem of industrial development. Right, but also a problem of political economy, right? That in terms of ideological hegemony and so on, right? But looking past those to more specific problems, but not losing sight of those either, right? We have some effects of the boom that are not so desirable, right? One of those, right, is the kind of intensification of a trend that's been going on, at least since the 1980s, which is the fragmentation of television audiences. Like with greater choice becomes smaller audiences in a sense, right? And right, we're so fragmented as audiences now. We're afraid to talk about television series sometimes, unless somebody in the room hasn't seen it, right? And you've given them a spoiler or something horrible like that. Right, and while this represents a boom for producers who are getting higher budgets and higher fees, right, that also means the costs for these productions are going up for buyers, right? And it's one thing if Apple, right, is spending great deals of money in Europe, but that also means, of course, that the public service broadcaster, right, in Spain must pay more for their drama series as well, right? The commercial networks in Italy have to do the same, right, and so on and so forth, right? And this is becoming a kind of day-to-day problem for other people competing with the platforms, other companies competing with the platforms, right? But it's also kind of becoming a macro level problem, right? In the sense that you're seeing very vividly in Britain, actually, with the kind of rationale for cutting funding to the BBC being said, well, we can watch these things on Netflix now, right? So we have a kind of double-edged problem for the public service media, right? In terms of higher costs, right? And right, a kind of, with this fragmentation of audiences, a kind of growing anti-public service media movement, right? Or at least that movement's gaining more strength from these changes we're seeing. Right, so more costly, right, fragmented audiences and so on, right? So more competition, more expensive content for a smaller audience. It's not a great formula for anybody. Right, and this the platforms. This is a problem going back to the Hollywood oligopoly. Is that American companies are, of course, much bigger and stronger in economic terms than European companies, right? So the biggest European media conglomerate would be Vivendi right now, and that market cap for that company is around 20 or 30 billion euros. Right, and that would make it about the size of well, actually a little smaller than the smallest of the U.S. studios, which would be Paramount. Well, it just rebranded itself as Paramount, right? But if you compared them in revenue terms, it wouldn't be close. Vivendi would be far behind, right? So this is just the normal Hollywood studios. Right, a company like Apple is worth trillions of dollars. Amazon is worth trillions of dollars. Right, and Netflix itself is several hundred billion, right? So these are huge differences in scale and power and influence, right? It's hard to imagine, right, RAI in Italy or ZDF competing with companies of these sizes, right? Never mind individual producers, right, who might be trying to negotiate a deal to make a series or a film for a platform. Right, and they can promise one film to that platform that is buying hundreds of films in any given year. Right, so the scale is very disadvantageous to all European stakeholders. Right, even our biggest stakeholders here in Europe are very small compared to the platforms. Right, and that's never been, the Hollywood oligopoly hasn't gone away either. Right, so. Right, we get to this kind of huge disparity in scale and size. Right, it leaves European producers, even though they have these opportunities, right, in a very weak and vulnerable position. Actually, right, because as easily as the platforms can open doors, they can also close them. Right, and right, we don't need to be reminded of the inherent danger of oligopoly, right, in the media industries. Right, and now a kind of disturbing trend really for the production community in Europe, right, as well as some of the companies I'm interested in, the distributors and sales agents, right, is that you're seeing the platforms now become very concerned with intellectual property, right, meaning the kind of ownership of the very ideas behind the works they commission, right, and this is the American model, really. American studios, when they buy a film idea, they keep the copyright and all kind of derivations of that intellectual property that can come from it, right? But in the European system, this isn't done as often, right? And this leaves independent European studios who are producers who don't have long-term deals at studios, like they do in the US, right, in the position of having really nothing to show for their work in the long run, right? They've many European producers now who make a Netflix series, receive only a kind of upfront payment, right? No matter how good the series is, right? They don't see more money from that unless they get a second season or a third, right? And Netflix is also very fond these days of canceling shows after 2 or 3 seasons, right? Which, in the long run will leave, it will mean that all these European ideas end up leaving the continent, right? It's great in a way that Netflix is more globally diversified in terms of the content they commission than Amazon or Apple, right? But that also means they're taking that intellectual property with them, right? And this is the top concern for many European producers these days when it comes to working with Netflix. So just reading, or any of the global platforms, just reading some coverage of the European film market, which just ended in Berlin, right? And many producers, vocalizing that same concern, right? That in the end we'll be left with nothing, right? Once we've spent our fees, right? Now, on top of all that, a real kind of part of the SVOD world, right, is that while we're all using it, while it's extremely cool from a technological point of view, while it seems to be producing everything, right, there's still a slight problem in the sense that it doesn't make any money, right? It's not a profitable business really for anybody involved in it. Netflix lost 160 million euros last year, despite having 225 million subscribers, right? Amazon's and Apple services are loss leaders for other parts of the company, right? Disney, Paramount Plus, these companies they're losing money on their streaming services, right? The plan for the legacy studios is to use it to increase attendance at their movies and sell more toys and all these sorts of things, right? But again, loss leader as a service, right? And that leaves open the possibility that it will never be a sustainable business, subscription video on demand, right? And so we might be seeing something like the Uberization of the European screen industries, in the sense that we get a low-cost, non-profitable business that pushes all the established businesses into unsustainability to compete, right? And eventually maybe they collapse and go out of business, right? And then we're left with nothing that is sustainable to replace it, right? So in this way, right, subscription video on demand, right, as a business model, I would argue represents a kind of systemic risk, right? We have to keep linear television and cinema exhibition and the value chain, right, existing in the global film industries and television industries, right, because we're not sure this new one is going to work, right, right, and we need a kind of diversification, right, and so on, right, and actually I think this is what's behind the lack of a European kind of competitor for Netflix, but I'll come to that just now, right. So what can we do with this landscape, right? What is the ideal recipe for Europe, or really any region in the world going forward? In this kind of situation, right? Because we don't want to discard the good things about the SVOD revolution, right? And we definitely have to be prepared for it to intensify, right? But at the same time, we have to do something to mitigate some of these other problems, right? So how to find the kind of balance that is good for everybody, right? The kind of eternal dilemma, right? Perhaps, right? But how can we do that in a European context, right? And the AVMSD, right, and other policy measures are extremely important. I don't want to kind of overlook them, right? But at the same time, they won't single-handedly, right? This is kind of the lesson of European policy, right? Even with the shift towards creative Europe and so on, right? We've seen European filmmakers actually lose market share with all these policy endeavors, right? Because policy alone isn't enough, right? And so if we're going to have a neoliberal economy, right, throwing a few taxpayer euros at the problem isn't going to fix it, right? So alone anyway, right? And so the report argues, right, and this very much the European Commission's point of view as well, is that we also have to kind of target right? From an industrial point of view, the development of bigger European companies, right? Unless we're going to get rid of capitalism altogether in the European screen industries, we actually have to make these companies viable, because American companies just keep getting bigger. Right? We'll know that Discovery is merging with Warner Brothers. We'll know that Disney just merged with Fox, and so on. Right? So we need bigger European companies as well. Right. Now there's a question of how to make that happen, right, that I dealt with in the report. If anyone wants to read it, I won't necessarily go into it here, right? But I want to explain why we need them, why we need the big European companies, right, in Europe, right? And again, if I could have included Britain, I would, I would count ITV, right, amongst this discussion as well, right? Because I think it's another one of these would-be European conglomerates. Right, and it's important to appreciate what they do for the European film and television industries, right, which are primarily made up, numerically speaking, of most of the employment in the sector is actually with the SMEs, right, the small and medium-sized enterprises, right. So without the conglomerates, these we have essentially a cottage industry. Right, made up of small players who are kind of disunited, have the competing agendas, and so on. Whereas conglomerates can play this role in the European film industry of creating scale, right? Very often in a slightly different way to the American conglomerates, right? They don't 100% own the SMEs, but they're investors still. Right, they help to structure those. They combine several different producers. They have a number of projects they can sell at once, right, and that gives them leverage, right, leverage that an SME doesn't have, right. And on top of that, they very often act as kind of knowledge hubs that communicate ideas about trends and legal strategies and so on to the SMEs. Right, and this is an extremely important kind of relationship, right? And very often these conglomerates are the best chance of the intellectual property being developed in Europe to stay in Europe, right? Not necessarily with their creators, right? Studiocanal is just as vicious as a Hollywood studio when it comes to keeping the rights for what the creators create. Right, but at least that work stays in European hands, which in the long-term political economy picture of European film and television, right, is the most important thing from the Commission's point of view, right? But again, European laws are written in a different way so that creators do have more IP rights with European companies, right? The Netflix, Amazon model, right, really threatens that. Right, so I'll just highlight a few examples. First I'll go back to the concept I tried to map out visually, right, on the cover of the report. It's about these interrelationships, right, and I think, right, you don't want a situation where the blue and yellow cogs are in direct contact, right, because then you'll have the Hollywood and Netflix cog turning the SMEs, right? You'll have those smaller companies at the mercy of these bigger ones, right? And so the ideal situation, given the realities in the European market, is that you have this intermediary, right? That can assist in various ways. Right, and so I just spotlight two positive examples of conglomerate intervention, right, in creators' lives and careers when it comes to working with the platforms. One, right, involves a French conglomerate called Gaumont. I'm sort of in the middle of writing something about now, right? And Gaumont itself, right, a very important series producer for Netflix and the platforms generally. They have a show on every single one of the big platforms now or in development. Right? And what they've done is to diversify internationally. Right, and so they produced, they created a subsidiary in Germany, very imaginative name of Gaumont Germany, right? And what they did with that subsidiary was to take their knowledge of working with Netflix, having produced Narcos and Lupin and many other series for Netflix. Right, and to give the German producers an idea of what could work with Netflix, right? What the platform was looking for. And even though the producers didn't retain the IP rights, to barbarians, they got it made, right? They had a series that they could sell to Netflix, right? Due to this knowledge sharing I was talking about. Right. The other example here, right, a great Netflix original film that just is now up for Oscar consideration. I think one of the better original films they've ever made, actually. Right, made by a very well-known auteur, of course, Imparo Sorrentino, right, from Italy. Right, and since Sorrentino started working on a series he made for HBO called The Young Pope. Right, his producer has been a company called The Apartment, right, which is a division of Fremantle, which is in turn a division of RTL, right, one of the biggest media companies in Europe, right, and that's allowed Sorrentino to make the film in the first place, right, but also to retain the copyright to the film, right. It's a copyrighted for The Apartment, the production company. Right, one assumes that under European laws, this entitles Sorrentino to more of the long-term life of the film than it would have been the case if it was just Netflix owning the copyright. Right, so again, these are two important kinds of interventions that the conglomerates can make. Right, when it comes to European production. Right, and then also when we're looking at other aspects of the ecosystem in Europe, right? Things like one of the solutions going forward, one hopes for public service broadcasters, right, is to rely more on international co-production with other public service broadcasters, ideally, right, if you're a public service media person, right? And what we see in the most successful of these co-productions is they're very often kind of brokered by divisions of the conglomerates, right? Meaning the sales, development services, right, that are very important to the creation of these co-productions are managed by the conglomerates, right? And so they, in a sense, are making these other kinds of, right, the competitors for the platforms, right? They need the conglomerates to make those that work happen. On top of that, many of the conglomerates own the linear networks, the other rivals for the global platforms, and then on top of that, they sell and distribute, finance, develop, right, much of European cinema. Right, very few of the conglomerates are involved directly in exhibition, but they supply the exhibitors. Right, so right, looking beyond SVOD, right, they're also very important to the future of the European media industry. Right, and then a final point to end with, right, is sort of the idea that we might one day want to have a European SVOD, right, one that's competitive with Netflix and Amazon and so on, right, and one that can function as sort of multinational way, right, and the problem in Europe right now is not that we don't have indigenous SVOD services. Every country has some. Right, is that they're just as fragmented as the European distribution sector used to be, right? Just as fragmented as pretty much every aspect of the European screen industries, right? So the idea of trying to find pan-European streaming service is appealing in theory, right? Yet its unsustainability is perhaps a reason to kind of have some pause about that. Right, but if it's going to happen, right, it's going to come from one of these companies, right, or through a collaboration between several of them. And we have a couple of currently some interesting experiments that are going on. Right, I'd first point out that Vivendi has been very cowardly about this particular strategy, right, and they've kind of clung to the pay television model, right, which is increasingly falling victim to what we call cord cutting. Right, but Vivendi's pay television, subscriber base is huge. It's the biggest single company in Europe in terms of total subscribers. Right, right now worldwide around 15 million subscribers. Right, a huge number, but Netflix is over 200 million, so it's not close yet to anything resembling Netflix, but still. Right, but it's the challenge is to try to get them to move towards the SVOD model. But they're being kind of circumspect in part because of the sustainability issue. Right, RTL, right, to the German primarily television operator, right, has created a number of different streaming services through its network of companies that it owns. including the very imaginatively named RTL Plus, right? So really picking up on branding trends and so on. But through their holdings around Europe, they also have a piece of a French SVOD service called Salto, right? A Spanish one called A3 Player, for a very interesting service here, right? And so on, right? Also different holdings in Holland, the Low Countries, so to speak, and elsewhere. So RTL has this kind of capability, if it ever decided to kind of band these together, of having this kind of network, right? But the biggest single multinational SVOD in Europe right now is actually from Scandinavia, right? It's run from Sweden, a company called Viaplay, right? Yeah, that's in the middle of kind of expanding to other countries, becoming much more multinational, right? So its latest rollout is in the United States and in Poland and in the Baltic states, right? Right, and its subscriber base right now is around 4 million, right? And it's getting involved in original film production, original series production, right? But it also loses money, right? So what to do with that, right? But it's a company based in Sweden, right? And I follow it with keen interest, right? And part of the report's conclusions is that we need to find ways to assist, whether it's going to be in the creation of these networks or just the work they're already doing in sort of mitigating the influence of global SVODs. We've got to assist these European conglomerates, right, and facilitate what we hope will be, anyway, a kind of greater competitiveness from Europe, right, and greater scale and so on. All right, so I will leave it there, right? I hope I kept the time, right? You don't actually see any time here, right? I'm sorry for that.
No, you did, Chris. Thank you so much. That was an amazingly detailed and well-structured presentation. And I have to say, it's been incredibly useful for me as well, because I'm very, very interested in your research. And I am, reading your report, and it's just been so insightful. So thank you so much. I will encourage our audiences to put their questions in the chat, and I do see 2 already. But before I move on to them, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about policy recommendations, because you didn't have the time to expand on that at the end. I thought you mentioned that quotas don't quite work, and quotas have never quite worked when they're just sort of this blanket, decision to help the industry. And I was wondering if you could focus on a few different issues, such as discoverability and searchability of European content. For example, a lot of those works are not promoted as being in the catalogue. They're just, part of the quota. The sharing of viewing data and how objective that is at the moment. And also representation of like minority countries and minority languages. Coming from Eastern Europe, I cannot not ask this question. So, how could European policy sort of address these issues for the global conglomerates?
They're all very good, complex questions that don't have an easy answer right now, right? The wording of the AVMSD is that platforms are required to have 30% European content prominently displayed, right? Prominently, but it's left very vague, right? Because how does one legally prove prominence? And actually, the directive again is meant to be implemented by member states, right? So it's kind of passing the buck to the member states to define prominence, right, and how to measure it, right? And I don't think anyone has a kind of clear standard for that right now, but you're seeing a lot of academic interest in this question of prominence, right? So that in itself is sort of interesting, right? I think that's one of the roles that we've got to be thinking about playing going forward, academics as a research agenda to kind of nip at the heels of these policy intentions, which are good, right? Prominence is something everyone wants, but we don't know. Now, data sharing, right, is the extremely hard thing to get the platforms to do, right? And virtually impossible in a kind of transparent way. We have now Netflix has increasingly been sharing data right, in a sort of top 10 way, right, and is self-reported. There's no independent confirmation as of yet. They're supposed to be hiring a kind of accountancy firm to verify their claims, right, but they're not required to. Right, and it's definitely something producers have called for, to kind of attach strings somehow to these laws that require data sharing, right, or at least that they be held to the same standards as television networks or so on. But there's no good plan right now. Right, one better plan is that, or one kind of promising plan is that the European Commission through Creative Europe does provide subsidies for video on demand services, right? And one of the ideas is to attach strings to that money that requires sharing of data. But that's we're talking about very small national services that, right, actually could be at a competitive disadvantage if they have to share that data, right? So it's not going to solve the problem either. Right, so I think there's a kind of hope that our third-party companies that are trying to measure SVOD viewing get better at it. But it's definitely something I flagged up in the report, and definitely something producers will tell you all the time. Right, but like many European attempts to regulate American companies, right, it's very difficult because they're not actually domiciled in Europe, right? So they kind of evade European law in that way, right? So I don't think the Commission has even a clear idea of how they would do it, right? It's just it's clear that producers want it, right? And the hope is that somehow the market will solve it, right? Which I'm skeptical myself, but I mean the third-party metrics have gotten more sophisticated in the last year. And then your final question about minority language or small countries, right? Again, the directive was very broad, right? And actually, a lot like Television Without Borders, the EU directive for TV quotas, right? It's open to this kind of abuse of just having national content only, right? As you're making up your quota. Right, I wouldn't call that abuse. I guess it's like the loophole or the thing that will ultimately make it sort of ineffective for European policy goals. Right, but within Eastern Europe, actually, a very interesting country has been Poland, who have their own kind of more strict quotas than the EU even calls for, and maybe because of that, we actually have quite a bit of Polish production from Netflix, right? Disproportionately to the rest of Eastern Europe, right? And actually, I'm struggling to think of another Eastern European country that has produced original. Oh, there's a Russian series now, right? But very, very limited production from anywhere else in Eastern Europe, which I think points to the value of the national quotas. But I mean, will Netflix go to great lengths to get the Romanian market or Croat market, right? That's a kind of bigger question, right? But right now, right, it's still a gap that's out there. And actually, Eastern Europe is where you see the lowest rates of adoption of the global platforms in all of Europe. And the only one that's very strong in that region, right, is HBO, because they have a long tradition of producing in that market, right? So it's actually one of the parts of Europe where you actually are seeing a fair bit of the market going to independent national platforms, right? So I don't know, maybe you don't need the help there.
Well, I mean, and then again, you've got the issue with scale and sustainability, and how long are they going to last, all of those small little platforms. But I am very aware of time and all of the questions that have come in. James, would you like to ask yours, or should I read it out? How do you feel?
Sure. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, good to see you, and brilliant talk. Thank you. Really interesting. So yeah, I was reminded as I was listening that often when we have guest speakers from the UK industry, so a good example is Curzon, who we have in quite frequently. They have a cinema in Oxford, so they're a distributor and an exhibitor in the UK. And when they talk to students about the deals they make with the big platforms, they often see Amazon in a much more positive way than Netflix, particularly with regard to the way they enable proper cinema releases, large scale cinema releases in the UK. So is this something that's echoed with your discussions across Europe? Is there, because obviously the Netflix and Amazon business model is very different. They're trying to work towards different ends. Effectively, Netflix couldn't care less about cinemas, but Amazon do seem to operate in a different way.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, firstly, it's anyone who's interviewed a lot of producers or people in the industry will know they're very reluctant to go on record criticizing one big company or another. So they would just say, generally, we're worried about, this, and this. But yeah, reading between the lines, my suspicion was that Amazon was a much more attractive partner. But not in the European context, right? In America, they're moving towards the Netflix model. Most Amazon films don't get theatrical releases anymore, right? So they're very limited, right? And Amazon doesn't release its American films theatrically in Europe, or barely does, right? Which is a blow to, some art house institutions depend on American cinema, right, for audiences. Right, but the localization of their film strategy has been very slow. There's very little in the way of there's several British Amazon original films, but not many from continental Europe. I could count them on one hand. Right, so what they've done instead is very often for here in Spain, for example, buying pay television rights to films, right, in a way that supposes they're going to play in theaters first, and then they stand to benefit that it's only available on Amazon, right? And the producers here love that, right, because it's another pre-buying partner. Pre-buy partners don't want a lot of creative control, right? They don't. It leaves a lot of the value chain open. Right. I couldn't say with authority what they're doing in every single European country. It's actually a kind of interesting area. They've stayed out of French cinema altogether because French cinema has a very strict windowing law, right? But in other countries like Germany, they're doing they're much more down the value chain and not wholly producing films, right? So you can imagine that being better for other stakeholders, but besides the other pay television networks, of course, right? I would say, generally speaking, that strategy has been more positively received by the establishment, right? And they also sell DVDs copies, right? They have a stake in that as well. So. And they have a TVOD service, a transactional video on demand service, which again, Netflix doesn't have, right? Which is another revenue stream.
Thank you, Chris. Unfortunately, Carl's had to leave, so we'll take Steve and Maria's questions and just be a few minutes over time. I apologize for that. So Steve says, to what extent do you think a European SVOD service might emerge from a coalition of European public broadcasters? And any signs of that in your research?
Yeah. Actually, I interviewed quite extensively members of the European Broadcasters Union, right? Who, very advocacy group, of multinational coalition themselves. And I asked them that question specifically to the head of digital, the digital part of their strategy. Right, and he said he didn't really see that as a possibility because public service broadcasters' remit is very national, right? And that has made many public service broadcasters are constantly facing when they do co-productions, they get enough kind of regulatory scrutiny about why are you co-producing with another country? Your duty is supposed to be to this market. Right, so he wasn't very optimistic. He's since left the EBU. I don't know if that's related, right? But the sentiment amongst public service broadcasters, there are two major initiatives with this. One is called the Alliance, and I'm trying to remember the EBU's specific body, but they're both these initiatives are geared towards fostering co-production. They really see co-production, right, as the key thing. And if the co-production is sufficiently well produced that it will then be sellable on platforms around Europe or so on. But right, there isn't a great deal of a drive for this idea of a pan-European public service broadcaster, SVOD. Right, and so I think it would be a good idea, but yes, it doesn't seem to be something that we're going to see.
Thank you, Chris. And Maria's question is quite similar in nature. It's about public service broadcasters and their VOD players. I mean, to what extent across Europe do public service broadcasters invest in having this additional online presence as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find it in many European countries, and you see, for example, we have a very good SVOD service from the public service broadcaster here that's free. So it's not actually, it's actually just an open video on demand platform. You don't actually have to subscribe. Right, and you'd actually hear producers talk about their local public service broadcasters as being very adept. And so I heard that in Belgium and Finland. Finland, for whatever reason, they thought their service was really, really top. Right, and there's similar initiatives in pretty much every European country that I've come across. Right. But surely not all of them work as well, right? But one of the ideas I put to the European Commission, kind of recommendation that hit the cutting room floor, was that that Europe could look at directing some of its VOD funding policy towards these public service broadcaster platforms. Right, and they didn't like that idea at all, because there's a thought that the public service media has to stay in national hands, and whereas the Commission was to be concerned with private enterprise and pan-European things, right? They are out there, right? I think it's a very promising part of the European media landscape, right? If we get widespread adoption, right? But yeah, it seems to be done at a national level only, right? It won't be a pan-European thing.
Sorry, thank you so much, Chris. I am very aware that we're a few minutes over time, so I would like to wrap this discussion, and thank you very much. Hannah, any final words from you as an organizer of this wonderful session?
I would just like to thank you, Chris, for a wonderful presentation, insightful discussion, and also Maya for moderating the discussion and also asking so many interesting questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Probably, Chris, if you could post the link to your full report as Chair suggested, that would be wonderful for all participants. Thank you for being here, and hopefully see you again soon at one of our events. And yeah, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.
Yes, thank you. And yes, I'll post the link. No problem at all. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
And feel free to email me, or if you've got any more questions. All right. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.